Hello everyone, my name is Phawx, and what you're seeing is the absolute apex of handheld design. Throughout this review, you may hear some criticisms from me on a number of issues, but make no mistake, GPD has designed the absolute best handheld in the smallest package possible. As I start going through my tests and optimizations of the GPD Win 4, it should become exceedingly apparent just how outrageously awesome this handheld is. I do not make this claim lightly. I pushed this device to 45-watt TDP for 1 hour and it brushed this aside no sweat. Thermal imaging shows that it's actually possible to use the device in your hands while running at this insane TDP. Now, the right side of the device does get warm at this ludicrous TDP, but I know people that would play like this. That is nuts. Apple would say this is insanely great. It's just that in this case, it's true. Think about it. Let's look at the specs. This is currently the smallest 6800U device. When we compare the Steam Deck to the Win 4, it becomes readily apparent how insane things are. And somehow, even though the Steam Deck is considerably larger, the battery on the Win 4 has 15% greater battery capacity, sitting at 47 watt hour. The panel is a 6-inch 1080p display that is mounted on a slider to reveal a beautiful physical backlit keyboard underneath. 720p content on this device looks fantastic, and with its default settings, regardless of OS used, you'll have both 60Hz and 40Hz options. However, the actual amazing properties of this panel is that it presents itself as a landscape display. You may not know this, but almost all x86 handhelds are native portrait, including the Steam Deck. I'll explain later on in this review why that matters, but let's first finish up the spec section of this review. GPD is selling the Win 4 in a few different configurations. There are two 16GB options and two 32GB options. Either option has LPDDR5 6400 in quad-channel configuration, or 128-bit wide. In my testing, this is around 94GB a second of bandwidth, close to the 102GB a second theoretical speeds. The $800 option is obviously the attractive option and finds itself value-wise competing against the highest-end Steam Deck. The $150 increase over the $650 model Steam Deck is, value-wise, absolutely worth it. The $150 increase over the $650 model Steam Deck is, value-wise, absolutely worth it. A lot of people ask what they should get. There are indeed instances where 32GB of RAM is absolutely necessary to run something. I've only found a few use cases like putting settings to Ultra Nightmare in Doom Eternal, and that would crash out a game due to lack of RAM. Now, you could just double your page file, which is not really advisable as you'll be swapping a considerable amount, or you could just lower your settings to solve this. Ultimately, 16GB of RAM will suffice for the majority of games available today. Having said that, I personally would only get the 32GB version because RAM isn't easily upgradable, and if in the future a game comes out and it turns out you can't run because of a RAM limitation, that would be a bummer. However, it could also be seen that you could just buy the next generation of handhelds and get 32GB then. Going to 32GB will not improve performance in games that don't need the extra RAM. The amount of games that require more than 16GB of RAM are in the minority. The NVMe used on the Win 4 is 2280 form factor, so replacing these with affordable options is relatively easy. There are two USB-C ports, one at the bottom and one at the top. The top port is USB 4 with Thunderbolt 3 capabilities, so if you wanted to use this with an eGPU, you have that option as well. I would personally recommend using NVIDIA 20 series cards or low-end 30 series cards. Using high-end GPUs like a 3090, some games like Cyberpunk show intermittent stutters that can bring down this experience. But using something like a 2060 and lower game settings, none of these problems really appeared. So my personal recommendation, if you were to use an eGPU, is to use a mid-range card. That being said, the eGPU functionality wasn't working on my Win 4. Potentially, this is a prototype issue or a configuration issue. If I'm able to, I'll make a separate video of this later on. Rounding out the rest of the specs, there is an additional optical mouse nubbin that will be an always-on mouse. MicroSD XC slot supporting A2 cards and throughput at 160MB a second. Dual front-facing speakers, Wi-Fi 6, and obviously the most important part, and the reason you guys care, is the included controls. On board is GPD's excellent Vita-style D-pad, as well as a set of Alps analog sticks. The D-pad on the Win 4 is god tier, clearly inspired by the Vita D-pad and featuring similar dome-based foundation, but with the tactility of the Xbox Series D-pad. It's such an outrageously good D-pad. Reliable, dependable, precise. It's just perfect. The analog sticks, however, are another story. It pains me a bit to have these analog sticks when the Hall-based sticks on the WinMax 2 are superior in every way. Fundamentally, the inputs are borderline okay, fidelity is on par with potentiometer-based sticks, a bit noisy, jumps out of its dead zone, and then the caps itself, well, it's the least attractive part of the entire console. The good news is that GPD has said they will offer Hall-based sticks to end users. You'll just have to install it yourself. I'm going to do this as soon as it becomes available. Finishing off, we have full L2R2 triggers and inspired L1R1 bumpers. Additionally, these have RGB lights that can be controlled with GPD software. There are buttons on the back of the device that can be configured in software. We'll cover that later on as well. Since I mentioned thermals, let's quickly bring this up again. GPD first showed off how good they were at designing heatsink fan solutions on the Win 3, and they managed to do even better here across the board. Not only is the GPD Win 4 able to withstand extremely high TDPs with zero thermal throttling, the external plastic housing is extremely resistant to thermal transfer. At 45 watts, the device is warm on the right-hand side of the device. There is no question here. Also, while pushing this device to this TDP, the fan is naturally audible and has more of a high-pitched noise profile to it. In this particular configuration, I would only really recommend doing this in a dock state myself, but I know that there are people that play like this. However, if we look at running the device at 20 watt TDP, fan noise and thermals on the device are actually quite excellent. If we were to take a look at the thermal imaging, at 28 watt TDP, you would see that the external plastic housing is basically the same temperature as my hands. So you can't actually feel any warmth there when running at this relatively high TDP. Now, the only thing I want to say here is that running at 45 watt will massively drain the battery if you're running on battery, and you need to make sure you're using a 100 watt charger with the appropriate cable to be actually able to run this for long periods of time. When running at 28 watt TDP, you're going to be looking at close to 1 hour of battery life. We'll talk more about this later on. Ideally, I like setting the device at 15 watt TDP because that gets you closer to 2 hours of battery life. We'll talk more about this in a second. First, my methodologies. I'm running Windows 11 22H2, Radeon 22.11.2 drivers. I'm using Sife's BAT, and if we look at the screen, Power CFG is set to Power Saver. Turbo Boost is set to Aggressive Efficient. EPP is set at 80, and even though it's recommended you set a ceiling on CPU below 4 GHz, I have set it to default for these tests. All right, now we're going to get into the benchmark section of this review. Now, I'm going to just reiterate some of the tests that I've done previous on the AMD 6800U platform. I'm not going to retest them here, but I am going to change the dynamic of where we're actually looking at these particular game benchmarks. So up first, let's talk about a few truths about AMD's 6800U platform. Number one, the system does not get its legs, does not start getting up to steam until at least 13 watts worth of TDP starts getting there. If you're going to engage the GPU, you're going to need at least 13 watt before this machine really starts picking up steam to be able to actually do stuff in modern games. So anything below that is really where the Steam Deck is going to win out. This is a general truth. Number two, 15 watt, even though 15 watt is a nice baseline TDP for this platform, going up in TDP does not represent a linear increase in performance across all titles. Some titles do show a big increase by going to TDP up, and some titles don't show much of a difference at all. So that's basically truth number two, is that pushing more power into the system does not necessarily mean you're going to get that efficiency back in performance. So just take that with a grain of salt. Truth number three is that with the optimizations that I'm going to be talking about later on, is that we are going to be in a situation where you can relatively set it and forget it. We would set a relatively high TDP. You can even just leave the default TDP on the device itself, which is around 22 watt TDP, and just use my settings. And when you use my settings, the system will dynamically change power based on what it needs up to the cap of 22 watt and go below that when it needs to. And it'll dynamically change in real time. As a general rule on the Win 4, if we were to be pushing 15 watt at all times, you're going to be looking at close to 2 hours of battery life on 25 watt TDP. If you were to engage that at all times, you'd be looking at around 70 minutes of battery life. So even though we're going to be going into optimizations on how to extend battery life as much as possible by giving it a power config that will dynamically change in real time, there are situations where just based on the game, it could be demanding max TDP at all times. So those are the three truths. Let's get into the benchmarks themselves. So up first is Batman Arkham Knight. I'm running at 720p with high settings and no NVIDIA effects. Now, the other thing that is new in this is that we're taking a look at 5 percentile FPS and 1 percentile FPS. The reason that I included these is that it's important if you were looking at setting a target refresh rate and being sure you can have a consistent experience at that FPS. So this is something to kind of keep in mind. But when we take a look at the difference between 25 watt and 15 watt here, it's not ginormous gains. And just having the default TDP is going to be somewhere. Just using the high settings, you're going to get a really good 40 hertz experience. Or you can go lower settings and go to 60 FPS. But I'm just showing you these settings just so you can get an idea of where that sits. Up next, we're looking at Cyberpunk 2077. Once again, I'm running at 720p, that's native resolution. I am using the Steam Deck settings preset, but I manually configured those because when you use the preset, sometimes it can get a little wonky, so I had to re-go through those and reset them. I do have FSR2 off. Now, the reason I have it off is just so that I have a straight 720p output when I'm doing these tests. You will want to use FSR2 at 720p, so you'll be running at sub-resolutions at 720p. However, if you wanted to run at 15 watt TDP, you will absolutely need to engage FSR2 at 720p settings to get it to a playable state. Well, here is one game where pushing more power, we actually see a sizable gain in performance, even from 1 percentile and 5 percentile. These are massive gains, and this is one game where pushing that power really starts to shine. Dark Souls 3, 720p medium preset settings. Remember that EPP is set to 80. I am using power save. However, I did not cap the CPU clock frequency, and we'll touch base on that later. We might be able to extract a bit better performance here, even at these two different TDPs. So what you're going to be seeing here is that we're just going to be using less power overall and still getting really good performance. You could also opt to use a little bit lower settings and get to a more stable 60 FPS more often. But if we take a look at our low percentiles, we're still going to run at a lower frequency to have a consistent experience. Days Gone, I ran at 720p with high preset and 70 degrees of field of view. Now, I use the high preset here because the shadow quality really starts to go down. Now, you can use lower quality settings and just bump shadow quality settings. I did that for Elden Ring as well because Elden Ring just really needs high shadow settings. Otherwise, you get this like flickering setting, and we'll show that later on. For Days Gone, it would be recommended to do a lower setting and bump shadow quality. Largely, it's going to be up to you, but this is just a default setting just so you can get an idea of what this performance looks like at these particular settings.
What did Leon give you? Map of some kind. Once we get my bike back, let's head up to the cemetery, look around. Yeah, okay.
This is Deus Ex Mankind Divided. I'm using DirectX 11 backend here. 720p and ultra settings. This is a DirectX 11 hard game, and I like showing it off just because it's a pretty taxing, relatively old game, but it actually requires a good amount of power. We can start to see that same type of power dynamic that Cyberpunk has, where pushing more power into the system starts really starting to let the system shine a lot more. This is Elden Ring. I'm running 720p, low settings, shadows on high. And again, I need to do the shadows on high because if you just use low across the board, you will see like those flickering shadows in the distance and stuff can be a bit annoying. This is a general idea of what the performance looks like at these two different TDP settings. This is God of War. It is still a DirectX 11 title. I am using low settings and 720p, and even though it's not in the title, I forgot to put it in there. This is using FSR2 performance mode, so I apologize for that. This is running FSR2 performance, and these are the performance metrics that I get. There is some fringing that happens around Kratos as you move the camera around, so just be aware of that. This is going to be something that you're going to have to do, but using FSR2 is going to be something that is really quite necessary for modern PC games. Grand Theft Auto 5, 720p and high settings. This is a game where using different settings, you're going to see relatively little change here. We can basically hit 60 FPS relatively comfortably, even at 15 watt TDP. And with my particular settings, it'll kind of go down often, quite a lot of times. So you're going to get pretty decent battery life when you're playing this game, close to about 3 hours of battery life. With Horizon Zero Dawn, I'm running 720p and favor performance. When we take a look at this, the game actually looks really sensational with these particular settings, but When we take a look at boosting TDP, we can actually start to see that large gain that we get there. So again, just be mindful of where we are and what frame rate target you're going to be looking for. Also, my particular settings are not something that are what you should necessarily use. These are what I found to be favorable for me for in terms of output and image quality. The thing that you're going to have to figure out is what you're going to be looking forward to in terms of battery life. For Marvel Spider-Man Remastered, in this particular setting, I'm not using FSR. I'm just using DX12 720p medium preset with TAA. I'm only seeing this now, but there is a typo right there on the bottom set of benchmarks where it says 25 watt TDP. That is actually 15 watt TDP. Apologies for that. I'm correcting that right here. But this is what this looks like. Now I'm looking at Miles Morales. This is effectively 540p. I'm using FSR 2.1 upscaled to 1080p with a high preset. So this is what that looks like from those settings. What I like about these two particular benchmarks is that they're relatively same, so you can get a kind of an idea of how drastic the settings actually make things. For Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I am once again running 720p. I am using the DX12 backend. TAA is on, and I'm using the high preset. Here again, we can see the difference between 25 watt and 15 watt, and we are actually getting a sizable gain here. And then last, I have Uncharted The Lost Legacy. I am running at 540p with FSR2 upscaled to 1080p. I'm using high textures but low settings. And here you can see that we really do need to have a higher TDP set just to be able to hit a consistent 40 FPS. Hopefully that has been informative. Generally speaking, when we think about like PC games that are running DirectX 9, you will be able to actually have 1080p native and hit 60 FPS, even at 15 watt TDP for DirectX 9 games. For more modern games, we're really going to have to start pushing more power to it to achieve even 40 FPS. So just be mindful of that, especially when we consider that as we're pushing more power, we're starting to come up to around 40 watts of power in total. And because we only have a 47 watt hour battery life is going to be pretty bad at these high TDPs. So you're going to really have to start balancing what you want out of playing modern games or play while plugged in, or you're going to really have to consider carrying an external battery pack to actually be able to play and have decent battery life here. Okay, so this is the optimization part of the review, and this is going to be able to get the best performance at all times and dynamically shift power, so you don't really have to worry about TDP so much. Let's get into it. In the description field below, you're going to find a link to the GPD Discord, which will jump you straight into the tools channel. If you scroll up, you're going to see all the different TDP versions that Cypher does. He keeps on adding to that. Right now, it's up to version 260, and what that allows is that if you push this little context menu button, it'll actually switch between 40 hertz and 60 hertz while you're in game. So that's really cool, so that if you can rapidly switch between 40 hertz and 60 hertz. Right now I have it set so that when I press right control, it actually opens up the bat file itself, and that'll do it in game as well if you actually wanted to change anything, which is really super helpful. At the top, you're going to see that none of my cores are parked, so all 8 CPU cores are active. My turbo boost is set to efficient aggressive. TDP is set to 15 watt and 15 watt, so just as a example here, let's just do G to set it to 20 watt. We're going to go ahead and reopen this, and you're going to see both the TDP on from the OS and the BIOS is now set to 20 watts, so 20 watt and 20 watt. Active power profile is power saver. That's actually very important, and it's very easy to enable. So let's go ahead and show you how we're going to do that. So you're going to go ahead and press V, and then you're going to set 1. And here is where you're going to press V again, import and apply power saver profile. That's actually really important. You're also going to want to disable game mode. We're going to press Z right there. You can see it'll say game mode is on. You can see game mode is off right now. So EPP at 80% is recommendable. Game mode off is recommendable. And make sure you import the power save profile. At that point, power save profile will be enabled and active. And then you're just going to set the EPP at 80%, so you're going to go ahead and press E there, and that'll set EPP to 80%. What this does is that it's going to kind of try to direct power to GPU more. The only other thing that we have to do here is we need to
and we're going to set a clock limit for our CPU. What this is going to do is create a ceiling for the CPU, because if we leave it at default, we're actually just going to be wasting power by pushing more power to the CPU, especially when we don't need it, because we're not going to really hit fantastically high frame rates. So what you're going to be doing, anything below 4 gigahertz is fine. Recommended from Scythe, I know, is 3.7 gigahertz. So if we go ahead and press 8 here, now we've set the CPU frequency to max out at 3.7 gigahertz. It doesn't mean that it's going to always run at 3.7 gigahertz. It's just that it's going to max out there, anywhere in between there. So with EPP saying, don't really care about pushing much to the CPU, and also cap CPU at this frequency, we're saving power on the package to really divert more power to the GPU, especially when it's necessary. This really helps us in a game when we're hitting a target frame rate, that we're not wasting power just spinning cycles for no reason. And that's pretty much all you really need to do to have optimized settings on the GPD Win 4, or really any AMD 6800U platform. There are other options here. You can statically set the GPU clock speed, which is what my old Phawx tweaks were. With the new EPP settings, you really kind of don't really need to touch that, but it does help in certain situations, like for PS3 emulation, you can force a higher GPU clock speed to get better performance. The only other thing that I recommend would be pressing Y, so you could create a desktop shortcut. And then in here is, if you are loading with Windows Hello, it'll tell you to enter your password. You're just going to go ahead and press enter, because there is no password, because you're using either a PIN code or you're using your fingerprint to log in. So just press enter there if it asks you for a password and you didn't set one. So you're going to want to hit create no UAC prompt. This will create a window on the front. At that point, you could also do number 3 right there. If you press number 3, that is what enables hitting the right control key to enable this bat. So if you hit 3 there, you're going to have to either fully sign out or reboot. But at that point, after you signed out and signed back in or rebooted, you should be able to hit right control, and then Cypher's bat will open up. And that is the optimization setting for this particular video. All right, so here we are looking at keyhero.com. This is a site I always use whenever I'm demoing keyboard tests on these particular different devices. Now, I've said this on the Discord forum that the GPD Win 2's keyboard is better than this, and I'm going to basically tell why. My word per minute score and plus my accuracy is much higher on the Win 2. I get around 43 word per minute score, and there's other people that type faster than me on the Win 2, but I'm generally around 43 words per minute. On the Win 3, it was around 20 word per minute and around like 89% accuracy, so pretty awful overall. Now, the one thing I really want people to understand is that these keys are all completely flat. With the Win 2 keyboard keys, they were domed over, much like a BlackBerry keyboard was. Them being flat makes it just a little bit harder to actually type, but this is not a problem of what GPD did. The GPD literally had to make these keys flat because of the sliding mechanism. So they couldn't make them domed, so it's really just a compromise of what they had here. Overall, the design of the keyboard is leagues better than the Win 3. We have what is kind of arranged into a normal keyboard, so we even have backslash here, pipe. All of the character keys are where you would expect them to be on a keyboard, much like how the Win 2 was. And then the Win 3 was just everything was square, so it was placement of everything, having it not being tactile, it was just overall bad. In terms of keyboards, Win 2 is superior, then it's Win 4, and then it's Win 3. But let's go ahead and do a keyboard test. I'll go ahead and fast forward this pass for you guys. Alrighty, so I had to go ahead and stop filming myself because it's nearly impossible to look through my viewfinder and type on this keyboard, but you can see right there that my speed is around 29.42 words per minute, so around 29 word per minute, and my accuracy is 96%. If you were to go back to my Win 3 review, this is about 50% better than I was getting on my Win 3 review. So this keyboard is 50% better than the Win 3's keyboard, and my Win 2 score is also it's almost 50%. My Win 2 score is about 40% better than this. So to put it into perspective, to quantify how much better these keyboards are, the Win 2, I'm getting 43 words per minute and better accuracy. Win 4, I'm getting almost 30 words per minute with 96% accuracy, and Win 3 is 20 words per minute and like 95 or 94% accuracy, something really low. So that's basically to give you an idea of where these keyboards are. The thing is that when I'm typing on this, I have to basically hold it like this. I am, because of how I'm typing it, kind of hitting this back button. Right now I've disabled them, so just be mindful that. So the thing here is that the only way I can hit any of, like all of these keys is I have to hold the device in this weird manner to be able to hit all these keys. So it's just really wide to hit all these devices. A clamshell would be much better for hitting these keys. This keyboard is nice otherwise. The other thing here that is kind of unfortunate is two things, is that the del key is larger, so I'm always hitting the del key for backspace, and the backspace key is all tiny. This isn't a big deal at all. You can actually just make a registry change to change these two keys, so that's not a big deal. I can just make this backspace and make this the del key, so I don't care about that. That's fine. The one thing is that all of these top row keys, whenever you need to hit them, because I use the edge of my thumb to hit, like you can see right here that for my right hand, I'm doing this. When I want to hit the key on this side, my thumb where I'm hitting doesn't hit it so well. So I actually have to like reposition my thumb to hit it over here. So that's the big drawbacks, is that this sliding mechanism kind of gets in the way for my fat thumbs to hit these number keys. I can swap the del and backspace, so that's not really a big deal. Having them be super flat like this is not the best for tactility. BlackBerry wise, when they're domed, is better. Still, if we were just to go by numbers alone, this keyboard is mathematically 50% better than the Win 3's keyboard. Overall, I'm a big fan of it. In terms of how it works inside of a sliding mechanism, it is much better than the Win 3's. So I can't really complain about anything. This is as best as GPD could possibly do, so there's nothing more I could possibly ask here. Thumbs up for me. When we talk about the included software that GPD has, they have this motion assistant. This one is made by Frank, so it's not actually even made by GPD. There's a third-party person that is using it, but GPD is kind of including it with it. However, this Win Controls is actually made by GPD here. So there's this button here, and this is actually really cool. So this back button functionality, you can actually assign whatever you want here. Right now, I have them as nothing. But for instance, let's say you wanted to make this the letter A. Okay, and now that's A. And then if we click save, this is on the back one. So if I go ahead and do this, now whenever I press the back key, you can see that that is now the letter A. So you can kind of make that whatever you want, and then kind of string along whatever you want based on milliseconds if you wanted to do a macro of sorts. So that's one cool thing. For me, I don't like having anything on here at the moment. I haven't really gotten into the groove of it, also because I kind of accidentally press the back buttons by mistake, so I just kind of keep these off. If we go into mouse mode, now this is really cool. So on the left hand side of the device, we continue to see GPD's function of going to mouse mode or a game controller. Right now I am in mouse mode. Now it used to be that all of these keys were kind of not great, like to be like page up, page down, the right arrow key. It was kind of bonkers. I don't know why GPD had it, but they kept on doing that same thing. Now they allow you to kind of make anything you want. What's really cool about this is that, technically speaking, this mouse mode you could make as your default for older PC games, things that are just going to have keyboard types of controls. So if we make this into WASD, then we can make this just the cursor keys. So playing old games where you were using the cursor keys to move around, you can now just use the D-pad. Likewise, you can make the R3 button enter. You can do space, left shift, right shift, left control. You can map all of these buttons, you can map all of those keyboard keys to these buttons inside mouse mode. This is one thing that I absolutely love because it makes playing older games way easier, and you kind of don't even need to worry about any additional mapping software. You can just kind of leave it in mouse mode and use these other buttons as your own types of old school game controls. So it's actually a quick way to do it that way. That's how I've been using it. They also have a function here where you can disable rumble or minimize how much rumble there is. And then a new addition here is you can see that they have, if we turn this on, so you have colors here. Let's just make this blue, and we're going to say it's going to breathe. When we say save, you can see that this is now glowing. Super cool. And that is pretty much all of the software that GPD includes. For me, that's honestly all I care to have. Considering that I have a full keyboard, I have a mouse always connected, and everything else I could possibly need, I don't actually care if there's any software on this particular device that GPD could make. It's just going to be extra software that's running and consuming resources, and that's not something that I really actually care to have. Alright, so here's the thing that most people don't realize, and I mentioned it in my INEO 2 review, and it's not terrible. You can work around it. There are software fixes to actually get this playable, but because most of these devices, especially in Windows, are a portrait-based panel, when you try to play older games, anything that's DirectX 8 or older, DirectDraw, whenever you play these games, you're going to have problems. See where it says it can't do that? Now, I just tried launching Abe's Odyssey, so you see on the INEO 2 that this is not working. And this basically just crashes out, and we're going to stop it. I'll go ahead and launch this on the GPD Win 4. So we're going to use the little mouse button right here. And where do I have? I have Odyssey already installed. I'll go ahead and launch that. And that's the benefit of having a landscape screen, is that playing older PC games on Windows is just going to work. Whereas on portrait-based panels, you do have to do some work, and I've already done a video on how to fix a lot of that stuff. It is genuinely hard to be critical of the GPD Win 4. When we take a look at GPD's recent output from what they've been doing, if you take a look at the GPD Win Max 2 and the GPD Win 4, the design considerations, this being a slider, candy bar type of design, they've knocked these products out of the park. The only thing that if I were to be super critical is these analog sticks. They are not as good as the WinMax 2. Since we have hull-based sticks out now, this is one area that would be better. GPD will sell aftermarket hull-based sticks, so we can individually make this better ourselves. These analog sticks aren't terrible, but to me, they are easily the lowest point of this entire design, because everything else about this device is just outrageously great. When we think about, yeah, this keyboard isn't as good as the GPD Win 2, but they can't possibly make it better. If you take a look at the design, there are design considerations of what they have to target to be able to actually fit inside this, and they did everything as great as I possibly could imagine. There isn't a lot of areas where I say, oh, they should have done that better. Oh, they should have done that better. There really isn't. I mean, this device handles 45 watt TDP. Not many other 6800U devices handle that TDP, and this just happens to be the smallest one out of all of them. That is insane. Like, how could you be the smallest one and also handle heat the best? That's crazy. I mean, GPD is just banging on all cylinders here. When we consider this being $800 for the base model, there is no early bird pricing. That includes 2-day express shipping. There is really nothing that competes with the GPD Win 4. If you were looking for the smallest 6800U device, there is no better. GPD nailed this. They knocked it out of the park. They did a great job. I am going to do some follow-up videos where I take a look at the innards, and we'll take a closer look at that. I wanted to have that in this review, but I couldn't make it because this was running long. Additionally, I'm going to be taking a look at installing Linux, and we'll touch base on that as well. And then I'll kind of cap things off with some emulation. But that is my look on the GPD Win 4. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.